Today we are going to take a loaf of sandwich bread made in the bread machine to a whole new level. Today we are going to be making a sandwich bread, but we are going to be making this one with a twist because we are going to add a banana. And the banana is going to take this bread to a whole new level. Hello friends, and welcome to Butterfly Meadows Homestead. I'm Dorinda. So the other day I was looking through the little recipe book that came with my KBS bread maker, and I was just looking at the different recipes. I kind of put myself in the place of a person. Let's say I don't know anything about making bread, and so I get the bread machine and I get this little book. What would it tell me? This is the one with recipes. And I noticed, I just want to point out here that I noticed one thing that every single one of these recipes have in it is they add gluten. I just wonder, why is that they say to add gluten? Because they're using bread flour in their recipes, but yet they're adding gluten. Now we know that gluten, extra gluten, is going to give you a softer bread, a bread with a more structure. So I can understand why they would say to add gluten, but you don't have to add gluten if you're using a high quality bread flour. I use a high gluten bread flour that I buy in bulk, and there's a link in my Amazon shop where you can buy the exact same flour that I use, and I always have excellent results. But I just want to put in here, if you want to use all-purpose flour and you have access to buy gluten, then you could add a tablespoon of gluten to your bread recipe to give it more gluten, because that's what makes bread flour. Bread flour is, it has a higher protein percentage, and that gives it more gluten. But I just wanted to point that out, that the KBS book, all of these recipes call for adding gluten. But I was looking through here at the different breads, and one in particular really caught my eye, and it's a banana sandwich loaf. And as I look at the recipe, which all of their recipes are a little different than my standard bread recipe, so I never follow the recipes in this little book exactly. I always take what I know works, which is my bread recipe, and alter it if I want to make something out of this book. And I want to make the one that adds a banana. But it calls for water, oil, a banana, bread flour. It calls for dry buttermilk powder, gluten, salt, and yeast. Well, my normal sandwich bread recipe calls for flour, oil, yeast, sugar, salt, powdered milk, and water. And so I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the banana. And since it called for buttermilk, and I know that that's going to give this bread a little more acid, add a little acid to it. It calls for the buttermilk powder. But I don't have any buttermilk powder, and I don't want to purchase buttermilk powder just for making bread. It's not something I would use a lot, and I know how to make buttermilk if I need buttermilk for a recipe. So what I did was I'm using whole milk. You can use any kind of milk you want to use. I'm using whole milk, and I had some kefir, so I added a little kefir to my milk. Now that's not buttermilk, but that is still going to add a little, raise the acidity level of the milk that I'm putting in. And you could just leave the buttermilk, or you could just leave all that out together, leave it out altogether if you want to make this recipe with just milk. But I just want to let you know that here in this cup, what I have 1 1/4 cup of milk with a little kefir added in, and it still measures out to 1 1/4 of a cup. And if you don't know what kefir is, and I may be saying it differently than other people, doesn't mean it's the wrong way to pronounce it, but it's also pronounced kefir. I'm not sure, it's Kefir. It is a fermented milk, just like buttermilk is. But this is just regular milk with a little kefir in it. And if you don't have buttermilk and you don't have kefir, but you want to add the acid level, you could add like a half a teaspoon of vinegar to your milk, and that would have the same effect. Or lemon juice. You might want to do lemon juice. That might taste better. But if you add too much vinegar or too much buttermilk, of course, that's going to mess up your bread. You may not get a good rise, and it might be too dense. So go easy on it. But I just wanted to let you know what I did, because the recipe did call for buttermilk powder, and I didn't have any. So I thought, well, I'll just make my milk have a little bit of a buttermilk flavor. So I'm not going to use this recipe. I'm just using my normal yeast sandwich bread recipe is what I'm using. I did lower my liquid amount to 1 1/4 because I am adding a banana, and banana is not liquid, but it does have a lot of liquid in it. So it calls for 1 banana. And I just want to show you what you can do with your banana. You want a ripe banana. The riper the better. And so while the banana is still whole in the peeling, just gently squeeze and massage the banana until it gets all soft and gooey on the inside. And then when we peel it, we're not going to have to cut it up or mash it up or anything. So I've already got this one massaged up here. It's nice and soft. All I have to do is open it up and put it in my mix. One more thing is I did warm my milk. You can use cold milk straight out of the fridge if you want to. My milk was very cold. Actually, it had been frozen and still had a few little icy pieces in it. So I warmed mine up to room temperature. The more ingredients you have at room temperature, the better your bread is going to rise. That's just science. So if you want to warm up your milk, that'll help your bread to rise, because the bread machine, you know, everything is on a timer. It's not like you can just give it more time to rise because your ingredients were cold. That's why it's best to have everything at room temperature. So the first thing you want to do, let's get started in making this bread. The first thing you want to do is make sure you have your pan clean and you have your paddle in position. No need to oil the pan or anything. Now we are going to put these ingredients in a little different order than we do in our regular white bread recipe. So the first thing we're going to add is our milk. Now if you are lactose intolerant and cannot use milk in your recipe, feel free to substitute the milk out straight with water. It won't have that much of an effect on the bread. So you don't, the milk really just enriches the bread, but you don't have to use milk. You can use water in its place, no problem. Or you could use your soy milk, almond milk, whatever milk substitute that you use. Now if you're using a milk substitute that is really sweetened, just know that's going to affect your bread because it's going to have that sweet flavor. So we put our milk in our pan, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to peel this little banana that I have already mushed up. Hopefully you guys can see everything pretty good. So I've peeled my banana and it's really mushy, and I'm just going to let that flop down into the pan. Whoops. Now we are going to add 2 tablespoons of oil. And I'm using canola oil. You can use any kind of oil you want to use. I'm using 2 tablespoons of oil. Now I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of sugar. You can use honey if you want to use honey. There's 1, 2, and 3. And remember, you can always find my recipes in the description below. And I realize that, excuse me, And I realize that I have viewers in countries that don't use the same kinds of measurements that we use, so I will do my best when I put the recipe below to also put the grams and units of measure that you would normally use, so that you will know what the difference is. But I have always used, you know, teaspoons, tablespoons, and cups and ounces, cups and such. So that's what I use when I'm talking, but I'll try to have it in the recipe below. I've just become aware that that is something that people need, so I'm going to do that in my recipe. So I've got my sugar, my milk, my oil, my banana. Now I'm going to add a teaspoon and a half of salt. I use pink Himalayan salt. You can use any kind of salt. Any kind of salt that you want. I recommend I recommend some kind of natural salt though, just because it's better for you. Now, I am also going to put my yeast into the milk, which is not something that I normally would do. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put 2 and 1/4 teaspoons of yeast into my mixture. Sometimes I put 2.5 teaspoons of yeast, but this yeast is very active, so I find that 2 1/4 does better, so that I don't get too much of a rise. So now I have all my liquids in my pan and all my ingredients except my flour. Now I'm going to add 3 cups of high gluten bread flour. Now I just scoop it out. I don't weigh it or anything. Now this flour is pretty packed because I had it vacuum sealed. I'll try to fluff it up a little bit. So there's our 3 cups of bread flour. Now I'm going to bring the camera down as I put the pan in the machine and show you how I set it. Okay, so we have our bread machine on. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to lock in my pan. Now I'm going to use the soft bread setting, just like we do on the regular white sandwich bread. Okay, so I'm going to put it on the 1.5 pound loaf, and for the crust color, I'm going to put it on light, and we are going to hit start. Now, like I always say, be sure and raise that lid and look at your bread as your dough as it begins to mix. Ooh, I can smell the banana. It smells so good. Now that looks quite sticky at the moment, but I'm not going to panic and add more flour yet. I'm going to let it mix for a little while and see if it forms a ball. So this bread's been mixing for I think about 3 or 4 minutes, and it's not quite forming a ball like I want it to. I'm not going to go crazy, but I'm going to add about a tablespoon of flour and see if that helps. I don't mind it being a wet, loose dough, but I want to make sure it's not too wet so that I get the right kind of rise and texture in my bread. When I measure my flour, I'm not always exact the way I scoop, and my last cup was a little bit scant, so that's probably why I'm having to add flour. But I'm pretty happy with that. If you want a tighter dough ball, feel free to add more flour, but I'm going to let this go. And we will come back when the product is finished And I'll show you what we have. Don't forget to like and share and subscribe if you like these videos. Our bread is ready to come out of the bread machine. And oh my, it looks so beautiful. Isn't that just lovely? Get it out of the pan. Now we're just going to let this cool and then we'll slice into it. Okay, so our bread has been cooling. It's still a little warm, but I'm going to go ahead and slice it. And I'm using this bread slicer. I got this at a thrift store. I do have a link in my Amazon shop to one that is similar, but they just don't make one just like this anymore. I'm also using an electric knife. I also cannot find this exact electric knife anymore, but I will try to find one that is similar and leave a link on my shop page. So let's slice into this. Oh, it smells so good. And just look at that texture. It's beautiful. It is beautiful sandwich bread. Has a beautiful texture, a beautiful flavor. So you gotta try this. Thanks for stopping by. God bless. Bye-bye.